Clara May Thompson had walked into the unforgiving arms of the Dust Bowl Hills to die. The world had already taken everything from her James, with his strong hands and quiet smile, and then little Sarah, whose laughter was the only music that ever mattered. The fever had been a silent, merciless thief, leaving behind a silence so profound it was a constant scream in her ears. Her cabin, once a home filled with the scent of baking bread and the warmth of love, was now just a hollowed-out tomb of memories. The land itself, cracked and barren, mirrored the geography of her soul. So she walked, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart made of lead, seeking the final, quiet peace that the world had denied her in life. The sun beat down, a cruel hammer on the anvil of the sky, and the wind whispered empty promises through the skeletal remains of greasewood bushes. It was in the shadow of a rock formation, shaped like a praying hand, that she stumbled. Her foot caught on a loose stone, and she fell, her energy spent, her will to go on finally extinguished. This, she thought, was as good a place as any. But as her cheek rested against the hot, gritty earth, a sound reached her, a whimper, thin and fragile as a spider's thread, coming from a dark cleft in the rock she hadn't noticed. It was a sound that should not have been there, a flicker of life in a landscape dedicated to death. Driven by a final, inexplicable spark of curiosity, Clara dragged herself to the opening. The air that wafted out was cool and damp. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom, and what she saw made her heart stop. There, curled in a dusty hollow, was a child. A little girl, no older than 5, her face pale and smudged with dirt, her body lost inside a man's heavy, dark blue coat. An old Union coat, its brass buttons tarnished but still bearing the eagle of the Republic. The girl's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, a tiny castaway on an ocean of desolation. In that instant, the crushing weight of Clara's grief did not vanish, but it shifted. It made room for something else, something fierce and primal that she had thought long dead. It was the instinct of a mother. She crawled into the small space, her own thirst and exhaustion forgotten. She touched the girl's forehead, it was cool, not feverish. "Hey," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "Hey there, little one." The girl's eyes fluttered open, wide and dark with a terror that spoke of horrors Clara couldn't yet imagine. Clara uncorked her canteen, which held only a few precious swallows of water. Without a second thought, she lifted the girl's head and let the water moisten her cracked lips. The girl drank, her small hands clutching weakly at the worn wool of the coat. Clara had come to these hills to find her end, but instead, she had found a beginning. A fragile, terrifying, an absolute reason to turn around and walk back toward the world of the living. She wrapped the child, coat and all, in her arms. The girl was light as a bundle of dry sticks, but in Clara's embrace, she felt heavier than the whole world. She was a responsibility. A purpose. And as Clara stood, her own pain a dull echo against the roar of this new mission, she knew she would not be dying today. Clara carried the child, whose name she would learn was Lily, back to the hollow shell of her home. For 3 days, she coaxed her back from the brink, using the last of her stores, some dried corn, a little flour for a thin gruel. Lily remained silent, a ghost in a big coat, her eyes following Clara's every move with a wariness that broke Clara's heart. The silence was different now, it wasn't the empty silence of loss, but the tense silence of waiting. On the 4th day, the waiting ended. Dust on the horizon announced them first, 3 riders, moving with the arrogant certainty of men who owned the ground they rode on. At their head was Silas Blackwood. He was a man carved from the valley's hardest rock, his face a testament to greed, his eyes holding the cold emptiness of a winter sky. He owned the bank, the general store, and the loyalty of the sheriff. He owned souls. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth, his smile a predator's grimace. "Morning, widow," he said, his voice like gravel. A tough seasoned Clara stood in the doorway, her body a shield for the small cabin behind her. "It is, Mr. Blackwood." He let his eyes roam over her, then linger on the cabin door. "I'm looking for something. Something that's gone missing. Heard a rumor you might have found it." His gaze was sharp, probing. "I haven't found anything but dust and heartache," Clara said, her voice steady, betraying none of the frantic pounding in her chest. Lily was hiding under the bed, clutching the big coat, silent as a mouse. Blackwood leaned against the porch post, feigning casualness. A child. A little girl. Wandered off from the orphanage over the county line, they say. There's a reward. He was lying. Clara felt it in her bones. The cold, possessive way he said the child wasn't about a reward, it was about property. If you were Clara, standing before this powerful, cruel man, what would you do? Would you risk everything for a child you barely know? Tell me in the comments. I've seen no child, Clara repeated, her jaw set. You're welcome to look. It was a gamble, but she knew his pride. A man like Blackwood wouldn't dirty his hands searching a poor widow's cabin. He smirked, a flash of grudging respect in his eyes. I'll take your word for it. For now. But Mrs. Thompson, be aware. This valley doesn't take kindly to secrets. Some things are best returned to their rightful owner. With a final, lingering threat in his eyes, he mounted his horse and rode away. That night, with the door barred and Lily finally asleep in her bed, Clara examined the union coat. It was heavy, well made, but old. As she ran her hands over the thick wool, she felt a lump in the lining, something stiff and uneven. Her fingers, nimble from years of mending, found a loose thread. She pulled it, carefully opening the seam. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilskin, was a document. A deed. It was for a small, 30-acre parcel of land tucked away in a canyon known as Whisper Creek. And on that deed, it clearly marked the location of a spring, a year-round source of fresh water. It was the only independent water source in the entire valley. The name on the deed was Corporal John Anders, Lily's father. And at the bottom, a handwritten note, for my Lily. The only thing that matters. Suddenly, everything became terrifyingly clear. Blackwood didn't want the child. He wanted the water. Lily wasn't a runaway, she was an heir, the last obstacle to his absolute control of the valley. The discovery of the deed changed everything. Hope was a dangerous thing, but this small piece of paper was more than hope, it was a weapon. Yet, it painted a target on the back of the small child sleeping in Clara's bed. She knew they couldn't stay. Blackwood's visit was not the end of his inquiry, it was the beginning. His men were now a constant presence, shadows patrolling the ridges, their purpose clear, to form a net around the valley, ensuring nothing and no one got out. Clara knew her destination had to be the federal marshal's office in Prescott, a 3-day ride away, but the journey seemed impossible. Every road, every trail, was watched. They were prisoners in their own valley. One of Blackwood's riders, a young man named Tom Riley, was different from the others. He rode with his hat pulled low, his face perpetually etched with a conflict he tried to hide. He had known Lily's father, John Anders. They had shared drinks and dreams of a better life before Anders had gone to work on Blackwood's largest ranch and then simply vanished. Tom had taken the job out of desperation, but every order from Blackwood felt like another shovelful of dirt on his own conscience. He saw the coldness in his boss's eyes when he spoke of the missing child, and he knew, with a sickness in his gut, that Blackwood's story of an orphan was a cruel fabrication. His loyalty was cracking, piece by painful piece. Desperate, Clara decided on a terrible risk. There was one other person in the valley beholden to no one, Dr. Elias Vance. The doctor was a recluse who lived in a fortified stone house at the mouth of the valley, ostracized years ago after a fiery public dispute with Blackwood over water rights. Blackwood had ruined his reputation, calling him a drunk and a quack, but the old-timers knew the truth. Vance was a man of principle, and Blackwood had broken him for it. Under the cover of a moonless night, Clara bundled a sleeping Lily and carried her across the scrubland to the doctor's formidable home. She knocked, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door opened a crack, revealing a shotgun and one wary eye. "What do you want?" a gruff voice demanded. "Dr. Vance," Clara pleaded, "I need your help. It's about John Anders' daughter." The name was a key. The door swung open. Inside, surrounded by books and the scent of antiseptic, Dr. Vance listened to Clara's story, his face grim. When she showed him the coat, his eyes widened. "I'll be damned," he breathed, tracing the eagle on a brass button. "I gave this coat to John myself. A payment for him helping me mend my roof last fall. He was a good man. He was worried about Blackwood, said he'd been pressured to sell his claim. The doctor then revealed the true, horrifying scope of Blackwood's evil. John Anders wasn't the first. For years, Blackwood had been systematically buying, threatening, and eliminating anyone who stood between him and total control of the valley's resources. He dammed up creeks, diverted water, and bled his neighbors dry until they had no choice but to sell for pennies on the dollar. Those who refused, like Anders, often met with accidents. The local sheriff was on his payroll. The law was a joke. That deed, Vance said, pointing a trembling finger at the document on his table, is more than a claim to land. It's a death warrant for him, or for the child. It's the one piece of leverage he could never get his hands on unseen by them. Tom Riley had watched Clara leave her cabin with the child. His heart torn, he had followed her, tethering his horse a safe distance away. Hidden in the darkness, he heard the doctor's words through the open window, and they confirmed every one of his worst fears. The final piece of his fractured loyalty shattered. He was no longer Blackwood's man. He was Lily's ally. The stone house of Dr. Vance became their war room. A plan, fragile and desperate, began to take shape. They were three against a tyrant's private army, a grieving widow who had rediscovered her fire, an outcast doctor with a thirst for justice, and a conflicted cowboy who had finally chosen his side. Tom, having revealed himself to Clara and the doctor, provided the crucial intelligence. "Blackwood's getting impatient," he reported, his face pale in the lamplight. "He's planning a full sweep of the valley, cabin by cabin, starting tomorrow at dawn. He wants the girl and that deed before the circuit judge arrives next week." Their window of opportunity was closing fast. The plan was simple, born of necessity. Tom would be their diversion. He would ride hard to the opposite end of the valley, to Blackwood's main ranch, and set a fire in the hayloft, a blaze big enough to draw every man, including Blackwood himself, away from the valley's eastern pass. While the chaos raged, Clara, with Lily, would make a break for it, riding the doctor's sure-footed mare straight for the mountains and the trail to Prescott. Dr. Vance, meanwhile, would take his own buggy on the main road, a visible decoy in case any of Blackwood's men were left behind. If you are enjoying this story of courage and redemption, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you tales like this. As twilight bled into night, the plan was set in motion. Tom gave Clara a solemn nod. "Good luck. Keep her safe." He swung onto his horse and disappeared into the darkness, a lone rider on a mission of atonement. An hour later, a faint orange glow flickered against the distant western hills, quickly growing into an angry beacon. The diversion had begun. Clara, with Lily secured in front of her on the saddle, urged the mare toward the pass. The doctor had already departed. For a moment, it seemed to be working. The valley behind them was alive with the shouts of men and the frantic pounding of hooves, all headed away from them. But Silas Blackwood was a serpent, and a serpent always anticipates the rabbit's escape route. As Clara and Lily entered the narrow, rock-strewn canyon that served as the gateway to the pass, two figures stepped out from behind a massive boulder, rifles leveled. Blackwood had left a rear guard. They were trapped. The mare reared as the men shouted for them to halt. Before Clara could react, the thunder of approaching horses echoed from the canyon mouth behind them. It was Blackwood. The fire was merely a nuisance, his true prize was here. He trotted forward, his face a mask of triumphant fury, his men fanning out to cut off any possible retreat. He stopped 10 paces from them, his cold eyes fixed on the child in Clara's arms. "A valiant effort, widow," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "I'm almost impressed. Now, give me the girl and the deed she's carrying, and I will let you ride out of here with your life. Refuse, and this canyon becomes your grave." Clara looked at the terrified face of Lily, who was clinging to her with all her might. She saw her own daughter, Sarah, for a fleeting second. The grief, the fear, the desperation of the past weeks coalesced into a single point of unbending steel in her spine. She was no longer just a protector. She was a warrior. She looked straight into the black heart of Silas Blackwood's eyes. "Over my dead body," she declared, her voice ringing with a power that stunned even herself. This girl is not a piece of property. And you will never touch her. The standoff was set. The air crackled with tension, thick and heavy as a storm cloud, ready to burst into violence. Silas Blackwood laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the canyon walls. So be it, he spat, raising his hand to signal his men. But Clara was not the same woman who had wandered into the hills to die. She was a survivor, forged in the fires of grief and purpose. In one fluid motion, she slid off the mare, pulling Lily with her. "Run!" she screamed at the horse, slapping its flank hard. The trained animal bolted, creating a momentary diversion as one of Blackwood's men instinctively went after it. Clara shoved Lily behind a cluster of boulders. "Stay down and do not make a sound," she commanded, her voice firm. She grabbed a heavy, loose rock, the only weapon she had. The first of Blackwood's men advanced, his face cruel. "Just give it up, lady. It ain't worth dying for." As he rounded the rock, Clara swung her primitive weapon with all her might, catching him square in the knee. The man howled in pain and collapsed, his rifle clattering to the ground. Clara seized it, the cold, heavy steel feeling both alien and righteous in her hands. She had never fired a gun in her life, but James had taught her how to load and aim one. The second man, seeing his partner fall, raised his own rifle, but a deafening blast from up the canyon slope sent his hat flying. It was Dr. Vance. The old man had not gone far. He had anticipated a trap, circling back with his old 12-gauge shotgun. "Get away from them, you vultures," he roared, his voice that of an avenging angel. The distraction gave Clara the second she needed. She pointed the rifle at Blackwood, her hands trembling but her resolve absolute. Blackwood, enraged, drew his own pistol, ignoring the doctor and focusing all his malice on the woman who had defied him. "You meddling fool," he bellowed, taking aim at Clara. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, a horse came galloping into the canyon from behind him. It was Tom Riley. He hadn't gone to the fire. He had sent another ranch hand he trusted, one who also hated Blackwood, to start the blaze. Tom had known, with sickening certainty, that Blackwood would never leave the pass unguarded. He launched himself from his saddle, tackling Blackwood to the ground in a flurry of dust and fury. "It's over, Silas!" Tom yelled, grappling for the pistol. The two men rolled on the ground, a desperate struggle between a tyrant and his former henchman. Blackwood's men were pinned down by the doctor's covering fire. Clara kept her rifle trained, waiting for a clear shot. Blackwood, stronger than he looked, threw Tom off and scrambled for his gun. He raised it, his eyes wild with hate, pointing it directly at Tom's chest. But before he could fire, a single, sharp crack echoed through the canyon. It was not the doctor's shotgun. It was the rifle in Clara's hands. Silas Blackwood froze, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. A dark red stain blossomed on his shirt, right over his heart. He staggered backward, his pistol falling from his limp fingers, and collapsed into the dust, his reign of terror ending in the very dirt he had coveted. A profound silence fell over the canyon, broken only by the whimpering of the injured man and the sound of Lily, finally safe, crying behind the rocks. Clara dropped the rifle, her arms shaking uncontrollably, and ran to the child, gathering her into a fierce, protective embrace. It was over. Justice, raw and final, had come to Whisper Creek. The aftermath in the canyon was a tableau of stark and sudden peace. Blackwood's remaining men, their leader gone and their will broken, threw down their weapons as Tom and Dr. Vance stood over them. The immediate threat had been extinguished, but the true victory was just beginning. The following day, alerted by a prearranged message sent by Dr. Vance, Federal Marshal Ethan Hayes arrived with 2 deputies. He found not a simple land dispute, but the unraveling of a criminal empire. Armed with the deed, the sworn testimony of Clara, the confession of Tom Riley, and the doctor's meticulously kept records of Blackwood's abuses, the marshal had everything he needed. Blackwood's corrupt enterprise was systematically dismantled. The local sheriff was arrested, and the stolen lands were, piece by piece, returned to the families Blackwood had ruined. The valley, for the first time in a decade, could breathe again. For the characters who had stood against the darkness, a new dawn arrived. Tom Riley, for his crucial role in Blackwood's downfall, was shown leniency. He surrendered his wages from Blackwood's service and dedicated himself to rebuilding the community he had helped to oppress. He became a man of integrity, his past a constant reminder of the cost of silence, and he earned the respect he had once sought in the shadow of a tyrant. Dr. Elias Vance came down from his stone fortress for good. His name cleared and his spirit restored, he reopened his practice in the small town, becoming not just a doctor of medicine, but a pillar of moral authority and a beloved elder statesman for the recovering valley. And for Clara and Lily, they found their home. The 30 acres at Whisper Creek, legally and rightfully Lily's, became their sanctuary. With help from Tom and other grateful neighbors, they built a small, sturdy house near the life-giving spring. The silence in this new home was not one of grief, but of peace. It was filled with Lily's laughter, a sound that healed the last of the cracks in Clara's soul. Clara officially adopted the little girl, giving her the love of a mother and the safety of a home. The woman who had walked into the hills to die had found a reason to live, discovering that a heart, no matter how broken, could be made whole again by giving it to someone else. She had not just saved a child, she had saved herself. The story of the widow and the orphan became a local legend, a testament to the enduring power of courage. It was a reminder that even in the most desolate of landscapes, in the depths of the most profound despair, a single act of defiance can ignite a revolution of hope, proving that one small light is all it takes to drive out the greatest darkness. The fight was over, but their new life was just beginning. If you want to see what happens when another brave woman stands up to injustice, click on the video now showing on your screen.